Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. You might remember a couple of weeks ago I was speaking to the legendary customer service expert, Rod Jones. Well, we're making this a family affair here on CX Files because this week I'm speaking to Rod's son, Evan Jones. Evan's also based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and is himself a highly respected leader in the CX industry. Evan was previously a senior executive of WebHelp South Africa and is now the CIO at the Harambee Youth Accelerator. Harambee is an exciting not-for-profit social enterprise that has supported over 500,000 job seekers and has actually placed over 100,000 people into real jobs. Many of those jobs are in the customer service environment, and for many of the job seekers, it's the first time they've managed to get a real formal job. I've seen Harambee at work in South Africa myself, and I can say personally that it's extremely impressive to see them taking young people without any chance of passing through the formal job interview process and then giving them the skills they need to get a real job. Evan's also the national board chairman for BPeSA, the trade association that promotes the business process sourcing industry in South Africa, so he's well aware of the bigger picture and how individual companies working on services such as contact centres can have a real impact on unemployment in African countries. Okay, that's a long introduction, but then Evan's a special guest, so now let's go straight to the interview. I briefly introduced Harambee in the podcast introduction, but it would be great to hear directly from you about the role you're playing in South Africa today. I mean, what is Harambee achieving?
So I think the best way to describe Harambee is really to start off with the problem that we're trying to solve for, and just to frame the problem in South Africa in terms of youth unemployment. So as of today, South Africa's unemployment rate is sitting at 27.6%. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, the president declared the youth unemployment as a national disaster that needs attention from business, industry, and government. And in number terms, really, we're talking about around 6 million unemployed youth, very talented youth, I might say, which I'll talk on later. But more alarmingly, the trajectory of youth coming through the schooling system of around 1 million a year, only 1/3 will find their way into any kind of employment or learning opportunities, which leaves 2/3 each year entering the unemployment population. Now, those are alarming statistics. So really, our role as Harambee is to act as a system change agent or labour market change agent to change that trajectory. And we've got a whole array of solutions across different sectors, across different industries, to really seek solutions for unemployed youth into the formal economy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. And I mean, that means that specifically you're working with these people to help them into employment. And that leads back to something I was thinking about, because when companies are trying to create a great customer experience, we often look at the employee experience. You know, if people are just looking at the clock and they hate their job, then it's going to be very hard for them to deliver a great customer experience. So do you think that your approach, working in partnership with companies to help people into employment that they appreciate, actually can then end up creating a better experience for both the employees and the customers they talk to?
Absolutely, Mark. So we've actually got a lot of empirical data that proves this point. And really, to speak quite specifically to our work within global business services and BPO, we typically are able to run match algorithms through our database and match candidates to these sorts of job opportunities. More specifically, though, we put them through work simulation programs that we call bridging, that really looks at simulating the workplace, but also a lot of behavioral transformation and self-mastery. These programs vary in length, but we now have empirical data that proves that our young unemployed excluded candidates perform as well, if not better, when entering into the work environment, having gone through some of these simulation and behavioral modules that we've taken them through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and I know that you're very much driven by companies that come to you and say, you know, we've got 30 places, can you help us fill them? Rather than a sort of a typical NGO approach, which would be, you know, provide training and then just hope the people can find a job. So how important is this sort of pull approach and partnership approach to what you're doing? And are you also working with the government itself or trade bodies?
Absolutely. So our business now is just turned 8 years old, and in the earlier phases of our organization, we were very high touch. And whilst we're very proud of the numbers that we've achieved in placing over 120,000 young people into the formal economy, it's by no stretch of the imagination addressing the broader problem as I outlined earlier. Therefore, we have to think about our role as a much broader systems change agent or labour market change agent. And in this context, we certainly have a strategy to partner with others, whether it's other operators similar to us, partner with governments in achieving big sectoral systems changes, as well as business. And how can we enable others to scale inclusive hiring practices really core to our thinking. In this context, in terms of global business services, we have partnered strategically with South Africa's industry association, which is called BPeSA, as well as the Department of Trade and Industry, over a 5-year period to double the size of our sector. And this just demonstrates to you how we've shifted our role from kind of delivering the training programs ourselves to actually influencing systems change. And the role we've played in that context has really been around, well, could we talk to industry about driving their own inclusive hiring practices that are very aligned to what we've been running for 8 years, but certainly not doing it all ourselves. It's just one example of the role that we're playing across sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that leads to an award you got recently. I know the Rockefeller Foundation and the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals awarded you the 2019 Impact Sourcing Influencer Award, which is quite an achievement. But is this leading to more international involvement? I mean, can you take the lessons you've learned in South Africa and export this globally?
We hope so. So I'll answer that question, Mark, in two. First is the recognition that we're very humbled by having received from IOAP was really recognition in our systems change work. And just to talk very briefly on that, essentially we were recognized for working with governments and BPeSA in changing some quite fundamental economic changes in South Africa at a policy level. And really at a policy level, with the DTI as our strategic partners agreed to include inclusive hiring as a qualification criteria for our incentives. What that really resulted in was mass adoption of inclusive hiring practices, for which the vast majority of which was actually not delivered by Harambee, but rather influenced by Harambee, which we're very proud of. In terms of our strategic expansion plans, we are regularly approached by first world countries, third world countries in Africa and the Americas, all over Europe, to replicate our model. Much like many organizations, we are grappling with how we scale our organization, what's the right pace of scale, and our readiness in terms of our own bandwidth. At this point, we are very deliberately on an African expansion strategy, and over the next 5 to 7 years, we will scale into between 7 and 10 African countries. As of today, we've already extended our services into Rwanda, and much about what we're learning about young unemployed youth in Rwanda and the solutions we have in South Africa are absolutely applicable, and that we can scale our technologies and processes into different contexts. We are very well underway with diligence on 2 more African countries, but certainly our focus at this point is on Africa.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. Well, when you're thinking about Brazil, just give me a call.
Just to share some statistics with you on Africa and unemployment rates, which I think you'll find interesting, Mark. Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, particularly with the youth that we service. By 2030, there will be more young people entering Africa's workforce each year than the rest of the globe combined. Mm-hmm. By 2050, 1/4 of the world's working age population will be African, making it the largest workforce in the world. So we often talk about at Harambee being in love with the problem and not our own solutions. And certainly this African youth bulge is a problem that we're deeply invested in and in love with, and that we hope we can play a meaningful role in shifting.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know that to date you focused a lot on contact centers as a way into formal work, but you've launched a recent digital skills initiative focused on coding, like software development, software analysis, that kind of thing. Can you have the same impact with these different roles? And are there challenges moving into sort of broader areas of employment?
Absolutely. So we sit on a very large database of excluded unemployed youth, and we measure competencies in different ways. And for example, measuring fluid intelligence and a way of learning kind of new, more complex skills such as coding or analytics. We're able to match some of that database to these job types. We're working with other partners. So in the digital space, we certainly don't profess to be the specialists in analytics or the specialists in teaching coding skills, but we've partnered with specialist organizations that do this. And in the digital skills space, we've identified a number of critical scarce skills. One is in analytics, second is in entry-level coding, the third is in testing, the fourth is in cybersecurity, and the fifth is in cloud engineering. And we're working with specialist academy organizations to bridge excluded youth into those jobs. We've had a number of cohorts go through. We've undertaken several thousand assessments to find these young people, and already our data is proving to us that we can disrupt traditional tertiary models or long models that take an extensive period of time to train, and that we can bridge young people into these pathways at an entry level very successfully. And so far, early indications are that the results are as good as traditional tertiary-based routes or learning institutions.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's really encouraging. So what's next for Harambee and impact sourcing more generally? I mean, what should we be looking out for from you over the rest of this year, for example?
So we are very much on a 10x scale impact trajectory using our own technology and working with partners. So I would summarize kind of what's next from Harambee in three parts. The first is we certainly want to create a multiplier impact, as I said, 10x, not by doing it all ourselves, but certainly working with others. So core to our strategy is partnerships and enabling others that share similar vision and purpose to us. And that's both in the South Africa context and African context. The second part is what role technology plays for Harambee. And we've been on a big digital technology transformation journey as an organization ourselves. And the application of technology to scale our impact across the country and across the continent is absolutely central to our thinking. And then third, as I've mentioned, our expansion into Africa and the broader African continent is certainly high on our radar.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I am @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.